I'll be honest with y'all, I kind of got sacked towards the end of the worship there. I just felt I'm a crier. I take after my dad. That man will cry in a heartbeat, honestly, it's something that I learned from, that it was okay to watch a grown man father cry. And I think I'm like just feeling some of that emotion this morning, some of the pull this morning, that I just think the Lord is after our hearts today. And quite honestly, I started to just, in the end of worship, just started to feel the weight of the gospel, like the weight of the cross, and just the weight of what it means to preach a word, and I just felt the Lord just go, like literally like this hand on my back, just like pushing, not like a bad push, but whenever you're riding your bike for the first time and your dad's just behind you, and he's like, I just want to be with you while you do this. I just want to, you pedal, you steer, but I've got your back, but do it uncaged. And I was like, okay. So we're going to do an uncaged preach today. I'm going to start with a statement about my personality. If you know nothing about me, and this is going to sound super weird, so just hang out with me for a minute, but I love plants. It's just a fact. And if you walk in our house right now, there are a lot of house plants. If you go upstairs to our attic where my office is, there's like 40 plants that are all like, I've been tending to. They're a month old today. I'm very proud of them. They've done a lot of work. I'm very proud of our vegetables and fruits or vegetables and flowers that are growing right now. I just got married almost 2 months ago, a month and a half. And we're like, all of a sudden I'm planting flowers just as many as I've planted vegetables. But I'm gonna actually blast some people really quick. I'm gonna start with Brandon Sousa because Brandon loves plants. And all of us know that Brandon loves plants. This man is a plant papa. He tends to each one. He was really excited about those blooms on that Christmas or Thanksgiving cactus, whichever one you want to call it. I don't know if I love them as much as Brandon does. I also like to think that I exercise a little bit more self-control in Costco than the next person you'll see on the screen, who every time we go in, Luke has to go, he's like, the plants are here. And he walks over, he's like, I just gotta, and I'm like, bro, like, you got a baby on the way. This kid's gonna like have to climb on these plants. You gotta be careful. So it was a whole conversation the last time we went to Costco. But I think through that, and especially during the months of March through June when there's just a lot of plants, Luke goes crazy the moment we walk in. It's kind of fun. But I think my love is a little bit different, if I'm honest. I like to see fruit. So a lot of my growing season is spent on plants that not flower or it's not for the foliage. I like to get something from it, which it makes me sound super like surfacey and transactional. But I love tending to something and then getting fruit from it. I'm a sucker for a good zucchini plant. Like, I love zucchini, grill it, saute it. If you need recipes, I got you. Like, that's how we roll. But I like to see something that's life-giving coming from it. And while Brandon and Luke might have a deeper love, I do want to argue that mine came first. So that was me showing off my big beefy muscles. If you know plants at all, you'll get the beefsteak reference because those are beefsteak tomatoes. But I say all of that because I can specifically go back to this moment when I was a kid at Miss Louise's house. That was my babysitter's best friend, and we'd go over there in our little town of Sedley, and I would be all about the plants. I was like, I wanted the biggest tomato that we could grow. Like, I was like, how big can they get? And I'm still that way. I'm growing beefsteak tomatoes this year, again, just to see if we could grow some big beefy plants. But here's the thing, and when I think about all three of us, whether it's Brandon, Luke, or myself, whatever, any other plant lover in the room, we all rejoice in the fruit that they bring. Yeah. For me, it's fruit that you eat. For Luke and Brandon, and sometimes myself, if I'm honest, is seeing that my wife is this way. She's like, look, we've got a new leaf. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I want to eat the leaf. That's the thing. I like growing lettuce. So it's the literal fruit. For some people, it's just seeing that growth, and it's watching something flourish, right? And more often than not, when we see growth, it leads to fruit of some sort. So today's sermon is titled, Abide in Me. And, it was funny as I was working through this sermon, as I've been working on it for a while, because I was actually supposed to teach 3 weeks ago and got sacked with the plague or whatever that was. So Dave, thank you for pivoting at the last minute and teaching that Sunday. I think really when we think of our relationship with God himself, it's kind of a good litmus test to check in on where we are and how we're doing, right? What growth are we seeing? What fruit are we bearing from that place? Are we growing? Are we bearing fruit? Are we taking steps in our relationship to go deeper with him? And I think that this is kind of where we want to sit today. But I'll be honest with you, as I wrote this message and as I went through it, it kind of turned into abiding started, but then it really turned into a pruning and a cutting. So I'm going to be honest with you. This one is hard to teach. It's hard to hear. It might be hard to hear. But as we go through it, I just want you to know my heart isn't to slap you on the wrist or something. My heart is just to see what we're growing in our lives. Can we take a minute and just look introspectively, but also look at what Jesus said about abiding and remaining and growing? So what fruit are we seeing? Of course, hard moments can and will happen, but I wanted to focus on Jesus's instructions on how to take root, grow, and flourish. So we're going to start in John 15. Context is super helpful when studying the Word. So when we teach it, we want to take things not out of context, but with context, right? We want to understand the full picture of what's happening. So a little primer on John 15. We know that John 15 comes at the end of the Last Supper. We know that it was after Jesus has washed his disciples' feet. So he's cleansed his guys. He's cleansed his closest. And it's after Jesus tells the disciples that the Holy Spirit will come to be their advocate, their helper. So it's a reassurance that what is coming will be hard, but they will have what they need. So just in the chapter before, Jesus is taking time to prepare his disciples for his departure, his closest friends for what's about to come. And he washes them, he cleanses them, and then he reminds them that though he's going away, he empowers them and that they will not be alone thanks to the power of the Holy Spirit. So it kind of leads us to where we're going to look today amid this Just Jesus series, right? It's been cool to see how many different people and different messages have taken different lenses, and I feel like we've gotten kind of a kaleidoscope picture of Jesus, not a twisted one, but just the same thing with a lot of different angles and reflections. And one of my favorite qualities of Jesus, speaking so directly in this moment, but so poetically. And I'm such an analogous speaker. I love to speak with analogies, and it's just something that speaks so tenderly to me. So when he threw in plants, I was like, man, this is epic. Like this clicks for me, And he's telling us how we fit into the bigger picture of life as we know it, while giving us a charge on how to live. So we're going to camp in John 15, 1 through 8. So if you have your Bible, feel free, or if you have your smartphone and an app, just tap, 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 tap. Do whatever you need to do, but I want to read it together. It's going to be on the screen with me, or the screen behind me as well. Verse 1 kicks off, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Thank you, Lord. All right, so there's a lot of vine growing, gardening, fruit, viney talk in there, right? But we're going to take that chunk by chunk, and I want to give you some key takeaways that have kind of helped me understand what Jesus is saying here. So there's 3 themes that we're going to kind of cover today from this passage. The first being pruning the branches. So we're looking at verses 1 through 3 there. Then the next being abiding in the vine with verses 4 through 6. And then finally verses 7 and 8 coming from the fruit of the vine. So we're going to start off with pruning. we can get rather quickly that Jesus in verse 1 is just letting us know that he is the way to life, right? Like we can all kind of put two and two together, hopefully, and we're like, oh, okay, Jesus is the way to life. But life only comes from the vine, and the vine is tended to by a gardener, the Father. I can tell you it takes time to tend to your garden. If you were to look at my back right now and my shoulders, you'd also know that sometimes it takes some sunburn. But it comes with these accessories, right? There's these moments where we see the body edify one another. That was the beauty. Luke stole the words out of my mouth. I was going to say thank you for worshiping this morning, because that was a moment where we all kind of got to play a part in that active gardening, that active tending. But if I'm honest, where I find myself in a lot of struggle is actually verse 2, where Jesus says, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. And while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. All right, so we've got cutting, we've got pruning. Jesus, why are you being so harsh? It's this moment, I'm like, dude, chill for a second. We get it, you're going to take some things out. But I want to look at the original Greek, because sometimes getting to the root gets us where we need to be, pun intended. So we're going to break down the Greek a little bit. So the first is just cutting off every branch. That cut, or ahiro, is to bear away or carry off. This word happens 97 times throughout the Bible. So we see Jesus, or the word used 97 times, this word of ahiro, to mean complete removal. It's just completely ripping it away. Now, let's look at the word prune, because cutting and pruning are two different things. And I'll explain that in a second. But pruning, he says it prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. That kathairo is to cleanse of filth or impurity. This is the only spot in the word where this word comes up. It's the only place where he actually says, in this space, metaphorically, I'm going to expiate, I'm going to atone for sin, I'm going to cleanse you completely. So I think it's important to recognize the difference between these two words as we hear Jesus say them, because he's telling us that he will cut off every branch that bears no fruit, but every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. In this moment, Jesus is telling us that the branches have no fruit, they get cut off, completely removed. So what is it in our own lives that we might need to be cutting? That's hard. So, I am a visual learner. I don't know if there's different types of learners, phonetic, but I'm a visual. So welcome to my garden. I'd like to introduce you to one of my bell pepper plants. But it's what but though, like I said, the cotyledons are rich. As you can see, that's the two little baby leaves down at the bottom. It uses that to supercharge itself and get more growth. True leaves are starting to pop in, so you've got more than two leaves. That's when your true leaves are starting to show up. So we are full steam ahead. But here's the hard part. How many plants are in there? There's two. So enter the cutting. A healthy plant, one not as strong as the other, not as ready, but when together they're competing for nutrients. So these two plants right now are competing for energy. They're competing for health and strength. They both look happy and healthy and strong, but as the gardener, I'm the one who has to keep the one that is growing the best. So, I told y'all I'm a visual learner. So, we're going to do some cutting, because why not? So this is our bell pepper plant, the same one that's in the picture. Planted a month ago. So you can see one is definitely taller and bigger than the other. But I felt the Lord last night as I was like, do I really do this, Jesus? And honestly, I had like a Holy Spirit pump, like brake pump of like, maybe not. But as I sat with him, he said, all I need you to do is explain how this is me. Don't explain the gardening, explain me. So, here's the hard part. If we know that one of these they're competing in this place, right? We're going to have to cut out the weak one. We've got to cut out the one that is, and you do this by getting to the very base, which is sad, right? I will tell you, the saddest day as a young gardener that I learned was whenever you had to actually like do this to all of your plants, and I planted like 80 plants, and I was like, what? And I wish I would have put it up there. I have a photo of me looking down at my table and then this just pile of leaves, and I was so sad. But what I realized was the moment I did this guy now can go a lot farther. He can do a lot more. So, the strong one lives on, he'll hold tight. Now, a lot of people will also look at this and go, why don't I just pull those roots up, right? It makes sense. I see that as the testimony. So there's something around this that if I uprooted this entire thing, it could damage the roots next to it. But if we get rid of the story that's left behind by this weaker plant, we're losing something nearby. And I think sometimes we expect Jesus to just kind of wipe our memories of everything we've done in our past that doesn't line up with his heart. But I really think sometimes, and I'll be honest with you, like I'll fall on my own sword again. Like I have stuff in my past that all I want to do is forget it forever. That's all I've ever wanted to do. I've prayed that prayer like, Lord, take this out. I don't want to think about that anymore. I don't want to associate with that person. Take it out. And he said, but if I take it, you're forgetting part of who you are. You're forgetting part of who I've made you to be. You're forgetting part of what we've overcome together. Whew. Come on. So this little guy will hold on. He'll grow tight. He doesn't risk going out and getting damaged by the other's removal. His roots remain right there. This process in gardening is known as thinning. It's hard, but every gardener has to do it to maintain a healthy crop. So God the Father knows himself that we must have things cut out of our lives to stay healthy. And not just that, but to abide in the vine and keep our roots intact. Sometimes he cuts things out of our lives that memory remains of what it was, just so that we can learn from it and be restored from it, like I just said. But pruning, on the other hand, is a very different process. Pruning is actually my preference. Thinning is very hard. That seed costs something. That seed was tended to. But pruning is really different. You see, whenever this pepper plant grows a little bit more, and honestly, once he gets to about here, he'll start to produce fruit, which is great. My pepper plant is sprouting off flowers and producing fruit. He's only a few inches tall, but you got it, buddy. Make that pepper. Bruh, no, it's not going to work. So in a few weeks, I'll actually need to prune off that fruit and prune back some of those branches. And the reason that has to happen is because I need this plant to strengthen so that he can carry even more fruit later. The plant will be healthy, lively, and think that he's ready, but he won't be. We'll have to prune it back so that that plant will produce more fruit later in the season when it can actually support the fruit that's coming. And if I'm honest, I think we've even felt some of that in this house. We've had moments where we're like, why is this being taken? Why is this being given? And the Lord's just like, sometimes I've got to prune some things. And it's hard, but it's good. So this plant has to be cleansed to bear even greater fruit. So again, going back to these words, why different? I think that sometimes certain things in our life do need to be cut, but certain things just need to be pruned. So as we look at that, I see cutting as the elimination, where pruning is the redirecting. We have to permit ourselves to be cut and pruned when necessary, even though it's a hard process. We're going to shift now. I'll put this little guy down here. Does anybody like peppers, like bell peppers? No? No? Michelle, was that your hand? Okay, great. Here. Take him home. Take care of him. I'll keep that guy as a little memento. I'll give you some care instructions before you go home, too. We're going to shift next to John, that next section, and talk a little bit more about abiding. So John 15, 4-6 says, "Remain in me, and I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, and apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned." I can tell you right now that if I do nothing with this little seedling, it will not bear any fruit. It has been cut off, right? Y'all just watched it happen. So it's not going to bear any fruit. And that's what Jesus is saying here. We can continue here, stepping kind of off of our last segment, and the knowledge that we now have of pruning and cutting. But if a branch is cut off completely, it won't bear fruit. But if pruned, it'll bear stronger fruit later. In verse 4, Jesus lays out kind of what seems obvious. And for a branch to bear fruit, it must be attached to the vine. Sure, right? But remember that Jesus says that he is the true vine, and all fruit comes from remaining in him. I think there that what Jesus is actually doing is he's giving us some permission and an invitation to receive from, depend upon, and learn from him. That's what that abiding really means. And in fact, Jesus says it in verse 5, apart from me, you can do nothing. That's a rather sharp statement to come from Jesus Christ himself. And ever so kindly, Jesus has woven in dependency on him and our common striving nature as obvious contradictions of the heart. So what does remaining in him actually mean? This is important to get to too. The Greek, meno, means to not depart, to be present, to be held, kept continuously, to last, endure, to remain as one, and to wait for. Jesus knew exactly what word he was using when he gave this charge to abide and remain. Those words really do mean the same thing, to be present in, to be with. And he wants us near, he wants us knowledgeable, he wants us close, dependent, through it all, with him, even in the waiting. I think last week we got a really good picture of what waiting can look like from Amy. That sometimes God waits, but sometimes we might feel like we're waiting. We're waiting on him. We're waiting on him to make the next move. And if you've ever played chess with someone who actually knows what they're doing, John Martin, I haven't played with him, but I've watched him. And he's told me it's a calculated move. And you're not just thinking about that move, but you're thinking like 13 out or something crazy. My brain can't compute that way. I just take care of plants. But I think it's important to remember that in this place, there's an importance to being present, to not departing, to hanging tight. And I've walked through some moments in my life where I did let go. I'll be blunt. I think we all have. We've all seen the temptation or taken hold of these moments where we can just unplug for just a moment. And it'll be okay, right? And suddenly we unplug and we detach from the vine and we go, wait a minute. I lost more than what I bargained for. I've lost something that I was holding on to, something that I could depend on, someone that was present with me, that was kind to me. And sure, cutting and pruning doesn't always sound kind, but the reality is that it's his kindness and his love that lead us to this place of repentance, that bring us back to the vine. So, I think it's important to linger a little bit on this abiding piece and how we can do it. How can we remain? So there's a few different ways. I think one of those is just quality time with him. It's defining that however you need to. And I will say this carefully. Quality time, defining it however you need to, but not being loose with your definition. Guilty as charged. I'm going to get 10 minutes with the Lord this morning, and suddenly my 10 minutes of the Lord are actually me making a breakfast sandwich while I'm listening to worship music. Post-gym, I'm like, okay, I'm tired. I got to get to work. Got to check the emails. All right, yep. Jireh, you are not. Okay, cool, yeah. And it's like we just, it's so quick to take quality time and check a box. But let me be honest with you. When was a quick self-inventory really fast? When was the last time you got some quality time with a good friend of yours? And how did you feel when maybe for 30 minutes of your quality time, they stared at their phone for all 30 minutes? Or they were distracted by a conversation of somebody else's. I do that with my own wife. I'm sorry. She knows it. She intentionally will put me in the seat at the restaurant that's away from everyone else because she knows She's learned so quickly that I'm going to scan the whole room, pay attention to who's ordering what are those people talking about. But this is the beauty of it. Because what it's taught me already is that this woman has learned something about me that I have a hard time seeing in myself. She has already helped show me how to be a better believer, be a better brother, be a better son to the man who just craves time with us. I cannot imagine going on a first date with someone and sitting down and they're like, hey, like how often do we do that with the Lord? So I think when we say quality time, there's not so much emphasis on time. I think we need to shift it to an emphasis on quality. This is so important. And again, I'm saying this and like wrestling with myself because it's something that I struggle with so much. I'm not preaching at you all. Thank God there's a wall right there to bounce it right back at me. Because I need it. I need these reminders in my life of what quality time looks like. It's getting the quality out of it. But more than that, it's the intentionality and the care that Jesus is putting in that moment. He has never no-showed to a date with you. He's never stood you up. Even what might feel like it, he never has. And in the kindness of his heart, in those moments where we think that he hasn't shown up, more often than not, it's our own mess that's getting in the way. And we forget to just lay it down and go, Lord, I'm sorry. I'm just going to give that to you. And he goes, oh, thank goodness. Yeah. Man, I know that I've said this with this microphone on my head before. This is hard. But some of us are really good at going to TJ Maxx and Marshalls and Home Goods and finding the red stickers. We're good at getting the clearance rack quick. But we're good at doing that to ourselves. Jesus paid full price. There was no discount. There was no 10% off like I got yesterday in a store just for signing up for text messages. Full price. Why do we discount the gospel? What right do we have to discount the gospel? So, quality, because he's worth it and he paid for it with you. All right. Intentional practice. Some rhythms of receiving and remaining. Some of those might look like cadre or church. Those expressions that are continual, rhythmatic. They come and they go, but you know that they're going to be there. It's kind of like a checkpoint in a video game. Sorry. But I want to be sure that we aren't just checkpointing church, that we aren't just checkpointing cadre, that we aren't just checkpointing your married women's group or your married men's group or whatever that rhythmatic thing may be, because it should be edifying. The moment that church for me becomes something that I showed up to and checked the box and came and went is the moment that I'm already like, uh-oh. Like I'm like 2 steps behind already then. Because something's happening in my heart and I'm missing the edification that should be in that space. And a lot of it, again, I'm putting my baggage on the belt before I'm putting myself on the belt, right? I'm putting other things in the way of my relationship with the Lord. Another way of abiding is some reflective study. So quick, we're able to take that quality time, knock it out of the way, but then we look at the reflective study of it all and we forget, like, who does he say that we are? Beloved, son, daughter, heir. We learn through prayer, devotion, and meditation on the Word. So I think those 3 combined are some ways to abide and remain. But before we move on from abiding, I feel like I need to give verse 6 a little shout out. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Some branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. Okay. I think here Jesus is giving us a very obvious warning to heed. This is not a fear tactic. I'm here to tell you that right now. Or a way for me or Jesus to scare you. In all honesty, I think it's a spot for the fear of the Lord to enter our hearts. So quick, we forget that the Word says things like this. We kind of glaze over it, right? It's easy to look at that and just go, okay, If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. We often look at what Jesus says about what we may receive, but we often can forget about the consequences of the heart that's disengaged or not abiding or not remaining. And again, I'm not saying that to be like the woe is me, fire and brimstone dude. I think there's just a reality of the fear of the Lord that sometimes we miss out on. There's something to remember that this man cares enough about us to also tell us what we need to watch out for. I know growing up, my dad, there's a hilarious story in our family of me going out by my dog's pen growing up and picking up this piece of landscaping fabric. And do y'all know what that is? It's like this little black tarpy stuff that they put under the ground. And I went to grab it, and the moment I reached down, it came at me. And I was like, that's not supposed to happen. I was like 8, but I knew dang well that this little black piece of fabric that suddenly shot out was a snake. And it was coming at me, and I'm like, well, my dad isn't here. But I knew my dad's instructions on if you ever see a snake. There's a tool for those. It's hanging on the back wall of the shed. It's called a spear-headed shovel. And I ran as fast as my little chunky legs could take me. I grabbed that thing, and I severed it in the middle of the yard. And then my dog tried to eat it, but that was a whole different thing. And I was like, Skip, chill out, dude. But we have these moments, right? And I think that's kind of what I see that as. Nice. I think I see that as these moments where Jesus is like, I am giving you instructions on what to do when this comes. It's not an if. It's not an if we'll hit a point where we're like, where am I with the Lord? Sometimes we're just going to hit it. That's not his heart for the world. I think that's important to remember too. There's things that came with the fall. But in this moment, he's like, I need you to know this. I need you to remain here. Abide in me. Live with the vine. And then when that moment comes, you know that shovel and you know the deed that you can do with it. All right. We'll land on the fruit of the vine. I think we've got 7 and 8 up there. I'll let y'all take a glance at it. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Y'all, that's a blessing of the work of remaining. And that's the fruit. As I get ready to land this thing, I think it's important, just as me tending to this pepper plant, or now Michelle, that as we take care of it and it soaks up the nutrients from the soil and light for the sun, it eventually will give peppers. Eventually it will just bear some fruit. And Jesus lays it out just as clear, wrapping up this charge. Abide in him, remain. And he will abide in us. And what I think is important to take a look at how he abides in us, that's the pruning. I think so quick we're just to go, oh, he lives in me. Well, is he correcting? Is he guiding? Is he actually, as my granddaddy would say, keeping you between the white lines? Is he keeping you where you need to be? Is he pruning and cutting away some things in your life? And it's from those two places, bless you, that the fruit will come. Again, Amy gave a great teaching last week on why God waits, and sometimes he waits on the fruit too. It takes time. I will tell you, peppers are the most frustrating thing to grow. I should have started those like before I got married in March. I started everything else on May 2nd. Because the reality is that peppers take a lot longer to produce fruit than zucchini do. I'll throw my zucchini in the yard in 2 weeks and we'll have zucchini and we'll bring bread and something like that. I don't know. But I think sometimes we're grabbing a rotten apple thinking that that's the best fruit that's hanging on the tree. Yeah. But when in reality, he's actually holding on to something sweeter. It's just a baby yet. It hasn't grown. So that would be my last charge to everybody. Be careful what fruit we're grabbing first. Sometimes we've seen it happen. The wrong fruit got grabbed, right? So I think it's important to pay attention is how we go forward and how we continue to grow. What fruit are we taking hold of? Are we taking hold of the fruit that's been on the vine, not the fruit that fell off? Have y'all ever picked up an apple off of the ground near an apple tree and like, I'm not eating that. Or I'm eating it and I'm going to end up in a hospital in a few hours because I know myself. It's not a good idea to take rotten fruit and think that it's good fruit. It's just not. And I think that's where, if we're paying attention to the cutting and the pruning, we know where that rotten fruit is. And if we've hung out with the gardener enough, he's already told us what fruit is rotten. If we're abiding in him and remaining with him, getting that quality time, investing, reflecting, he in those moments is guiding us through that garden of life and telling us what we need to pay attention to and what we need to get rid of.
Training in the process.
That's it. If we want to see the fruit of God in every part of our lives, we have to remain in him for every part of our life. We have to allow ourselves to be tended by the gardener of the soul.
Yeah.
Our willingness to open up and let him move in our lives is dictated by us. We get a choice. We get a decision. And I think that's my invitation as I close today, is I invite you to take the step to allow yourself to be pruned. Allow those things that aren't fruitful to be cut. And it's hard. He said it would be hard. We've reflected over this series on ways that he said it would be hard.
Yeah.
But it's vital. It's the only way that life comes forward. I'm grateful to be able to share this with you all today. And in my hope and prayer truly is that as we continue to kind of understand and walk out this process of abiding and remaining, that we would continue to be a people that are okay being cut and pruned as well. Let's pray together.